which the Jews refer to as Rosh Hashanah, is another such day, but it's not as intense as the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement instructions. It says you shall not work. It lists about 7 different days where you shall do no work. Anyway, it says this is a law in perpetuity. So I don't think even Jesus came along and abrogated anything, and I'm not even sure he was qualified to do so. I'm not a theologian, so I'm not going to get into that argument. But if people walk around with this book and carry this book, it seems to me that those are commandments that are rather incumbent on people who think a lot of this book, if you care about the book, just to honor the book, just to take the book, walk around with it, and treat it like a joke. That's one way of doing things, the way the world does things. A lot of religions do that. They pick and choose what they like. They take one morsel from here, one morsel from there, and then chuck away the rest. I have to be honest, Muhammad does that, and so does Paul. They both do that, and I think it's an illegitimate way of proceeding. You can't, if you don't want to use it, don't. That's fair enough. Dishonor it, that doesn't make a difference. But if you think you can just take bits of it and then chuck away all of the rest, and then take it and make it an esoteric exposition, I may be a fool. I'm living 2,000 or 1,500 years after these people. These people have been honored by billions and billions and billions of people, most of whom I consider to be fools, but that's my own personal view. I don't think they're fools for honoring something. I think they're fools for never thinking about anything seriously. And I think that's the definition of a fool, someone who doesn't think about something in a serious manner. So, something to think about, how to deal with this particular issue of the day of rest that, since we're doing the class, commanded by this particular book for that particular day, and seriously so commanded. What I meant by fools was people who don't think seriously about things. They just think they can do these things without thinking about it. So, I don't think Paul is a fool, and I don't think Muhammad's a fool. I think they're extremely clever people. I think they knew exactly what they were doing, and they did exactly what they wished to do. But I'm not sure that they were, I don't think that they were necessarily within the realm of permission, that it was a legitimate thing to do, to pick and choose from a book, say, oh, well, God commanded this, but he didn't command that. You know, I mean, I don't, or you say God didn't command any of it and chuck it, or you say God commanded some of the things that are in there and you follow them, particularly if it's very seriously. So anyway, that's my view. If those two fellows were here today, I would be very happy to debate these issues with them, and I don't think I'd come out too far behind. But in any event, so you've been in my classes, and usually that's the way I feel. And I've gotten more intense like that as I got older. When I was young teaching these classes, I really didn't feel that way. But the more I've learned about all these things, the Bible, the New Testament, the Quran, and so on, I seriously, I mean, I don't follow the rules in the Old Testament, I have to say that. But as such, I respect them as I respect what's in a book. And now the question is, this is one of the most holy commandments. You should not work on that day. It's a day of atonement. Okay, so what do you think we should do for that day? Should we just skip class and not come, but then we'll be behind another whole period, which is tough on you. On the other hand, we could have an early exam at that period, at that time, and what we've covered today, next time, I think we probably would have enough to do an exam. I could hand out the exam, have someone else collect it, and that would be the midterm. I think that might work, actually, an early exam, you know, and then coast through to the final, etc. To my mind, that might be the best idea. Let's see how far we get today. The third possibility is to do nothing and just have the class, but then I and some of the members in the class will feel quite guilty. Now, some people have already called me telling me they're not going to be here that particular evening. Any other suggestions from the multitudes? No view on it. No suggestion. Okay, so we'll keep it in mind. I don't think it's next week. I think it's the week after. So that's my, huh? Oh, 2 weeks from, is it, it's not next week, it's not the week after, it's 2 weeks? Well, then we definitely will have enough for an exam. So we can do the exam on that day, and I'll have someone administer it or something like that. Is it the 12th? No, it's late. Well, I think we're in good shape. That's what we'll think of doing then. We'll have an exam on as far as we've gotten. Even though, you know, I don't usually do that, but that'll be fine.
So on the 12th of October?
The 12th of the new moon, the 12th of the witch's brew, the 12th of October, it looks like. Yeah, we'll have the exam on that day, even though it's a bit early. Okay? Then you won't miss a class. Then you'll have class to write, and that'll be good to work. So that's what we'll do, and we're all solved. Let's go back to our book then. I didn't need to even go to all that seriousness. I was going to ask you what you felt was the right thing. We did the flood story, right? And we got to the end of it, and we found out about the different text lines, which is very complicated. But we did see that one of the writers is very detail-oriented, and he's the repetitious one. And he's the one that often likes to show off his knowledge in lengths, widths, years someone lived, precise times that they lived, back to the beginning of time. And one really has to kind of chuckle to oneself, because we're really not going to, I think, take credit for all of his figures. So I have to say, you go the further down in Orange County you go, the more credit you'll find given to those figures. So the more fundamentalists the world gets, and I have nothing against fundamentalists, but again, I don't think that they really think seriously about these issues and what's involved in making claims of that kind. Always, even in the New Testament, like to say, to me, I'm just a nasty person. Was you there, Charlie? Did you have a tape recorder? Did you hear these things being said? And yet everyone, of course, takes them as gospel or the biblical truth. And I'm sure there are. I think you say, well, if your attitude is so casual, you might say to me, how come you're so worried about the other thing? Oh, well, it's a matter of respect. I don't say that everything in the book is a weighty commandment that one must observe. On the other hand, I think if the book is really worried about something and thinks that something is extremely serious, one should try to be a little bit deferential to that. It's just like your parents. How are you going to treat your parents? You don't observe everything they say, but there's some things that you know they really are serious about, and you try to do your best to pay attention to them, particularly if you respect them and show respect for this book. And again, I will criticize my Christian associates and others who actually walk around with this book tacked on to the book that they care more about and pay no attention to what is demanded in it. And I think that is really, I don't know what the word is, but it's very superficial. And I think they should think more seriously. They shouldn't walk around with the book tacked to their other book, or they should pay attention to what's in it. Now, I know a lot of Christians do. There are a lot of Christians who do understand that. And there are about, I think back in the Civil War days in America, there were more, because the Bible meant a lot to, particularly the Old Testament meant a lot to Americans at that time, because it reflected their experience on the frontier somewhat. And as I told you, each person felt they were interpreter of the Bible, and they kept the Sabbath and things like that. They were a lot more serious than people in our century are. And I don't know what century we're in, the 20th or the 21st. I get confused here. So we're on the cuff of one century, and it really hasn't begun yet. But I think at one time in America, this book was taken very seriously. And all you have to do is look at the names of the people, how they were named. Abraham, Zechariah, or someone like that. You find Zachary Taylor, for instance, another general. You can go down the list and you'll find a lot of biblical names being tossed around, not just John and James and and names like that, but a lot of Old Testament names that people, Obadiah, Jeremiah, a lot of Old Testament. So I think at one time this was, and I respect those people who, if they're carrying the book, take it seriously. And so since we're studying the book, if you don't you're studying it just for an exercise, that's fine, you don't need to take it seriously. But if you're studying it because you care about it, then I would be careful of it. I would be careful of it. Anyone who doesn't show up for that exam, therefore, that night is qualified to do a makeup. So I'm not going to force anyone to show up for that particular exam. But I will do the exam that night and have it handed out. All right, now, so the priestly, this person who's very knowledgeable, he is the one who, actually, funnily enough, he's not the one that's involved in the sacrifice here, which has to do with the seven pairs of clean animals and birds, and only 2 of the others. And we see now the reason for the 7 pairs of the clean ones because of the sacrifice. The priestly one we'd have thought would be interested in sacrifice, but he's not he's rational, but he's more interested in basically showing off his information mastery. And so what has the editor done? I think it's pretty clear. We'll see it in other ones. You may disagree. I think when you follow the name of God, Lord, or God, the word God, Elohim, you can see that someone has done some very, not even careful splicing, just 2 manuscripts, snipped them up, put them like this side by side, and tried to make them, thought they were both holy, obviously. And since he thought they were both holy, he didn't want to throw anything away. Okay, so in the priestly one, we get the chapter 9, the continuation of the mass creation idea that permeates the first chapter. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. I give you everything, but you shall not eat the flesh with the blood in it, with the life. And that there, he just talks a general command of not eating the blood because the blood has the life. The other day we were talking about this in, I think it was in Islam class that I teach, or it may have been in a religious diversity class, and we were looking for this passage, you shall not eat the flesh of life, that is, with the blood in it. And once again, you have a tough time harmonizing that with Paul in 1 Corinthians, where he says, drink the blood. I don't know how he can quote biblical writ and then say, drink the blood. That to me shows a very cynical view of the materials he's dealing with. And I'm a very big critic of his, because I feel that though he's a very good poet and an extremely able theologian, and though he obviously is possessed by his own vision, he is, he will do whatever he needs to do to make it work. He's a fixer, and I guess I just feel that that is not a legitimate way to handle materials. You can't quote the Old Testament on the one hand whenever you want, and then on the other hand, totally deny it. How is that possible? Anyway, you're looking at the only person probably in the whole country who says these things, so you can take it or leave it however you want. But I think later on in life you might want to think about this. In any event, that's why we have things in Islam and Judaism even today where it says, or where people speak about kashrut or kosher or halal in Islam. I think halal is permitted or clean. In any event, kosher means permitted as well. I think allowable or something to that effect. But in any case, the reason is based on things like this here and a lot of other things, but mainly this sort of thing, where the Jews won't eat supposedly meat with blood in it. Well, I don't know how they get rid of it all. That's another question you might want to ask them. I mean, they supposedly salt the meat. They do everything they can, and that's why kosher meat is actually slaughtered in a pretty impressive manner. I don't think slaughtering any creature is fun, or nice to see. If you've ever been to a slaughterhouse, you'll understand that. But at least they don't, it's not carrion, that it's not already dead or something. They are very insistent on this being something very vivid. In any event, I just can't see for Islam and Judaism and exactly taking the meat and eating it. You know, Hebrew National hot dogs are maybe more reliable than a lot of other hot dogs. They probably haven't ground up mice and other stuff in them. They're very careful about how they would prepare those things because of the laws of kashrut, as they call it. But I don't understand how they think they've got all the blood out of a piece of flesh. You know, that I can't understand. I think they do the best they can, but I just don't see that that's so. I mean, that's a law that I would agree with Paul to some extent on, but I don't think he can then pick and choose like he does. For instance, just to make a quick run up here to something in the book of Acts relating to this, which most people, since they don't read the Bible for themselves, they don't feel qualified to read the Bible for themselves. I would like to make you qualified to read everything for yourself. That's what this class is partially about. In Acts 15, when Paul goes up to Jerusalem, because as Acts is behind his position, so it's doing it from his point of view. As Acts puts it, some people came down to his community and said that unless you've been circumcised according to the tradition of Moses, you cannot be saved. And so they got upset about this in Paul's community. He goes up to Jerusalem, and it triggers this thing called the Jerusalem Council. So all the apostles and the elders supposedly meet here. But James is pictured as making a speech, and it's not James, the brother of John, because he's already dead. It's James, the brother of Jesus, and he's alive and he's the leader, and everyone is clearly having to obey him, though Acts doesn't tell us why. In any case, at the end of the ruling, he says, you are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, that means carrion, and from fornication. There it is again, abstain from blood. That's a ruling over the whole church. He repeats that ruling further down here. Let me see if I can find out. He repeats it. Well, that wasn't the first time he made it. Here it is. The first is line 20. I rule then that instead of making these things more difficult, we should send the people down in Antioch a letter telling them to abstain from things polluted by idols, fornication, strangled things, and blood. And then once again in chapter 21, just in case there's any mistaking this matter, James meets Paul up in Jerusalem for their last meeting, and James is clearly a very observant Jewish person, sends Paul into the temple. And James is observant and Jewish. What does that say about his brother? I've said in my book, James, brother of Jesus, once you found the historical James, you found the historical Jesus, because the historical Jesus wasn't the historical Paul, which is what the Gospels want us to think, because in fact, Paul never even met the historical Jesus, didn't know anything about him, and persecuted early Christians and so on, and his only knowledge of Jesus is through supernatural visionary experience that he claims to have, and unless you credit supernatural visionary experience, you're not going to credit those kinds of claims. But again, who might argue 200 billion people have? And I think I would say that I'm in a minority of one, because in fact, even Jewish people know nothing about these issues. If I said these things to a Jewish person, they wouldn't know what I was talking about, because they don't read any of this either. Anyway, this will, look, Paul, we want you to go in here and do these things so people will know. We have a foreman under vow, Acts 21:24. And everyone in the church are bound to hear that you have arrived. And they have heard that you instruct all the Jews living among the non-Jews to break away from the law of Moses, offering them not to circumcise their children or to follow the customary practices of the law of Moses. So look here's what I suggest we do. We've got 4 people under a vow here. You're bringing up a lot of money here. Take these men along with you and be purified with them and pay all their expenses, because we know you've raised a lot of money overseas, including shaving the heads. That's why I read this to my students in the Islam class, because after the pilgrimage in Mecca, Muslims shaved their heads. And they did it in the temple too after these Nazarite oath things. And Paul does it here, and he did it once before in Acts around chapter 15. And then this will let everyone know there is no truth to reports they have heard about you, and that you still regularly walk according to the law. Well, of course he doesn't, and the reports are true. But Acts, nothing loath, carries on, and Paul carries on. He goes in and does this, and then he calls this a riot. For the non-Jews who have become believers, we wrote and told you of our rulings. They must abstain from things sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from fornication. So that's the 3rd time. Abstain from blood. So then how can you square that with a commandment to drink the blood of Christ even in a symbolic way? I mean, maybe, okay, it's not so at odds, but it's pretty much at odds. Did James and his community know about Holy Communion? I don't think so. I don't think they knew anything about it. I think that's totally new. I think it's a Pauline idea. I think it's first announced in 1 Corinthians. The reason I'm talking about it is this law in the Old Testament: do not drink the blood. And then James here repeating it for the early church, and all the early church agreeing to it, and he being over all the others. And Galatians makes that very clear in chapter 2, that when the representative of James came down, even Peter stopped keeping table fellowship with Paul, because at this point he had to follow James's instructions, and he knew Paul wasn't doing these things. So therefore, even Peter and Barnabas started to shun Paul in Galatians 2. You can read about it. So, and that's because James is the leader of the early church, which no one in Rome has ever told us. So therefore, I ask, what is a believing person supposed to do? And if I were a minister or a clergyman, I'd try to answer that question. But since I'm not, I just leave you to wrestle with that. Most people just don't even pay attention, just carry on and that's that. But if you're serious, interested in religion, I think you will wrestle with such questions. Yeah?
I mean, just to be the devil's advocate.
There's no devil to advocate here. You know, there's what
I'm just
the reading
thinking
is.
for Paul, I mean, obviously I understand what you're saying, but isn't that a symbolic gesture when they're
Well, I said you can do it symbolically. If you think that's fine, that's
they're
good
not
enough.
actually drinking the blood. It's a symbol.
Well, by the time the Vatican got done with the transubstantiation of the host, for them the blood had become real. That the wine had literally.
Catholic idea, but not a Protestant.
I didn't say it wasn't. I didn't say it was. Although some high church Protestants probably go according to that. Probably some Lutherans, Episcopalians probably hold to that view. But I agree with you. I think grassroots Protestants are more free in their mind and think for themselves. So I think, sure, you can take it symbolically, but I think you do have to ask the question, were the Jerusalem people aware of that commandment when James made these rulings? That I think is a legitimate question. My answer is no. You can take the yes side. I just take from the evidence of the documents. Because I can't see how James could say that and still then say, okay, let's just do this symbolically. I mean, if I did that, you'd chuck me out of the room here. You wouldn't pay attention to what I said. That's what I mean. We know what Paul says. You've read your scripture, obviously, and you claim devil's advocate, and you're right. Paul in chapter 11 of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 10:12, announces all these things. And you can read how he seems to be answering James's rulings there. Because he says, now as to things sacrificed to idols, which is what we just heard about here, here's what I think about that. An idol is nothing in the world, therefore you don't have to not eat things sacrificed to idols, like the big shot said. Only when people who have weak consciences, who are weaklings, come, then abstain, because they're so weak that they can't take seeing you do this. And therefore their consciences will be wounded. All this is incredible argumentation. and I don't think anyone really reads this stuff. It's in chapter 8, 9, 10 of 1 Corinthians. You'll see that it's correct what I'm telling you. Because, ministers don't tell their people about it, and most average believers just take the thing as already regulated and don't even figure there's a problem here. So in any case, so he goes on like that, and he finally ends up, some of these people whose consciences are weak, I can read it to you if you want, but I don't have a good translation, so I'm here. Some of these people whose consciences are weak, they're so weak they'll only eat vegetables, meaning they're abstained from meat altogether because they don't want to break any of these laws. And he's saying that vegetarians are weaklings. We don't think vegetarians are weaklings. Normally, we think people who are vegetarians are very, very strong. But that's him, because he's very facile, and he's extremely, as I said, what was the word, cynical. He'll take any argument he can to try to, make the progress of where he's going. And okay, if the construction he's making is a beautiful thing and it appeals to you, which it does to most people, I think that's fine. But if you are a kind of a nitpicker or a worrywart and say, hey, hold on here, now, like you did to me just then, how can you do that and do this too? Then you might begin to worry. So anyway, that's all that is about Noah's commandment: do not eat the blood, because the blood has got the life in it, and you are not supposed to eat. I don't know why. I didn't make the commandments. I'm just saying that's in there, and that's why it's a big deal. That is why it's a big deal. It's been a big deal for Jews. The abrogation of it somewhere along the line for Christians is a big deal, and it's all because of this particular episode here. Okay. I'm sorry I got off the track, but I thought those might be interesting to you to think about those things, and that's what's come down the pipeline over 2,000 or 3,000 years from this material. And then, of course, in the priestly Eloists are going to call it that, we get the very famous thing about the fire next time, when James Baldwin, the famous Afro-American writer, wrote a book called The Fire Next Time. And this is where God promises the Rainbow Coalition. We've heard about Jesse Jackson and others. Afro-Americans like the Bible and often take it seriously, but they too generally pick and choose. For instance, when a spiritual comes along, Ezekiel's bones, there'll be a song, very, very clever song, them bones going to rise again, and so on and so forth. But it makes the whole thing sound a little childish and silly, when in fact it's an incredibly moving appeal, and there it is symbolic for the restoration of the people to the land of Israel. It's just, he said, and I saw them stand up, a vast and immense army. We'll do that at the end of the class, Ezekiel. But these things like this particular passage here, have been used by lots of people. I heard someone on the radio, television, just within the last week or two, talking about the New Orleans flood. If we don't do something soon, it's going to be the fire next time. And that's right out of this passage here. So there's a lot of people that get very worked up about some of these things and use them for, whether they use them for sermonizing or whatever. But that's the passage it's based on. And so God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant, line 17, I have established between you and every living being that is found on the earth. When the bow is in the clouds, I shall see it and call to mind my lasting covenant between God and every living creature of every kind found on the earth, that I will not destroy the earth again. And so on and so forth. I don't know where the fire next time is, but somewhere buried in some of this material there is that statement, though, and I don't think it's in this particular passage. Here it just says that the rainbow is the sign. Well, now look, we're serious people. We know that the rainbow is probably not the sign that God will not destroy the earth again. That's what the poet has read into the rainbow. That's fair enough. If the poet wants to see the rainbow as a sign that God is going to be gracious and sympathetic and comforting, who are we to argue with that? But I only recently realized what a rainbow was. I don't know if you've noticed, but the rainbow, if you look in the sky, it just doesn't appear everywhere. And often it doesn't appear. But it almost always appears, it always appears when the sun is over here and the moisture is over here, and the moisture filters the sun's rays out into a reflection of the sun's, what do you call that with the sun's, not just the spectrum, but the whole thing around the sun, anyway, whatever you want to call that thing. And the reason it's round is because if you look, the rays are coming from the sun. There's a thing around glowing objects. It's called there's some word that does describe it. But so whenever I see a rainbow, I always say, I can look for the sun because I know it's got to be the opposite end of the sky, and it always is. And that's because, and I learned that as I got older, because when I was young, I always thought, oh, here's a rainbow, here's a rainbow, here's a rainbow, very interesting, And I never connected it to, the aura of the sun, whatever you call that. When you see an eclipse, and the body being eclipsed has that circle of light around it, that's the word I'm looking for. None of you know what that word is? Anyway, there's a word for it, but I can't think of it. But anyway, that's what the rainbow actually scientifically has to be seen as being. And the poet is reading more material here, and that's fair enough. And you say, well, there you are, Professor Eisenman. You don't have to take everything seriously. No, that is certainly true. But I think it's not something that one should. You can't just if James made a ruling in the early church and he was the boss, and Peter and all the others hove to, and James is the closest living person to Jesus, and surely James knew Jesus better than Paul knew him. He spent his whole life with him. How are we to come along and do what Paul tells us to do when he never even knew the chap? And the people closest to him have a different view. And in fact, the only authority he's claiming is visions. He claims supernatural visions. I mean, this is mind-boggling. I don't mind if you're a Jamesian Christian, if you think that's what Jesus taught. But I can't understand how anyone could think that what Paul is writing about Jesus taught. That's something beyond my comprehension. But I may be stupid. I think the same for Muhammad. When he picks and chooses things as he does and goes around shrieking in his work that the Jews and Christians lie, and then he takes half of the material from them. I can't understand those kind of contradictions in a person's character. I feel that there's something really seriously worrisome there going on in that person's psyche. And I think both of those people have very similar psyches and resemble each other a lot. Okay, back on to our text here. The sons of Noah went out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, didn't we just have that before someplace? I think we did. Now, let's see if we can go back, because my Bible's falling apart here. I think, and line 532, when Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then again, line 610, Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Both of those things, I think, are from Elohist priestly texts. I have a feeling what's going on here is line 18 of chapter 9 is from the Yahweh's text. It seems a lot more formal, less formal, a lot more casual. The sons of Noah went out from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, okay. And then, yeah, here we're getting, I think, looks to me like a Yahweh's genealogy, because it's very focusing. So I think that's the reason for the overlap, the repetition. Now, the average person who takes the Old Testament just doesn't read it and worry about the repetitions. Oh, well, they just say, oh, well, the Old Testament is a repetitious document. But I think that there's more to be seen in the repetitions if one wants to pay attention to that. Ham is the ancestor of the Canaanites. I smell a story coming up. And therefore I know I'm in a Yahweh's, because he tells all the good stories. These 3 were Noah's sons, and from them the whole earth was peopled. Okay, that's a good storyteller's presentation. And Noah and his people always do things like, they're the father of silversmiths, or The other is the small father of the people that build the cities, and someone else. Do you remember that genealogy earlier? This is like, here's the genealogy earlier that was a Yahweh's genealogy. It was in chapter 4 from Cain, 17, and you can see 17 to 26 or so. You can see it's the same style as that. And you can see that was all part of a text that was not cut up the way this one is. And spliced around. Okay. So now we're going to tell a story, another story, a nasty story about one's neighbors. Usually when one has a nasty story to tell in life, it's about one's neighbors or someone that one knows. Not usually someone that one doesn't know. And let's be frank, the Hebrews are as weak as everyone else. They're not shining examples of virtue in every way. They have some high-minded things, but they also suffer from the prejudices and mindset that many that we're familiar with in our world. And here, what the Hebrews don't like are the Canaanites. They're their neighbors, and they think that their particular. We're going to get this in the Abraham stories when Abraham goes down, Lot goes down, as we may have already mentioned, but Lot goes down to Sodom and Gomorrah, and the people of Sodom and Gomorrah say to him, the people who are sheltering Lot in the town of Sodom, send out the person who you are giving hospitality to, so that we can have sexual activity with it. Modern word, B-U-G-G-E-R in slang modern word. And the point is that these Canaanites, whether they're in Sodom or elsewhere, were thought by the Hebrews to be very interested in what we now call sodomy. That kind of sexual activity, man-to-man sort of sexual activity of a very clear kind. And that's what this story is again about, because you see what they're talking about is Canaan. The fact that Ham, they're not so interested in Ham. They don't care what Ham is. They're interested that Canaan and his descendants have these sexual behavior patterns. And they disapprove of them. And they look down on them. So here's a story about that disapproval. It's it's a fun story if you're not a Canaanite. It's a cute story, but it's also pretty ill-mannered and ill-tempered. Now, should we take this historically? I wouldn't want to blame this on the poor Hebrews, all these things. I wouldn't want to blame this on God. I think that this is just Hebrew attitude towards their neighbors. But, I had a Muslim in the class. I think I've told you about him. I get it mixed up a little bit because I'm doing an Islam class, and I tell stories about him in the Islam class too. And he took this class, and he hated these stories. He was absolutely outraged by these stories because his view of the patriarchs, they were perfect. They were wonderful people. And he couldn't stand these kinds of stories told about the patriarchs. This is going to be a rather nasty story told about Noah. What's the butt of this story? Noah's lying out there, sprawled out on the couch or bed area, drunk, and presumably his sexual parts are showing. And the point of the story is who showed respect for their father and tried to cover him up, and who actually did something else to their father. That's what the story's about. But it makes Noah look like a complete idiot, and so on and so forth, because the storyteller's not interested in making Noah look wonderful. So the storyteller is interested in telling you a good old story that he probably has heard way, way back in time. And it's really not even about Noah. It's about Canaan and their neighbors. It's a nasty story about the Canaanites. And now I'll tell you what the story is. Now, okay, I'm telling you the genealogies, and I get to the point where Noah is the first to till the soil, and he was the first to plant the vine. So this is obviously Yahweh's So because he's the first to plant the vine, we get sidetracked into a story about being drunken. Because anyone who plants vines and harvests grapes, you know, gets drunk in their mind. So Noah must have gotten drunk quite often, according to their way of thinking. So he drank some of the wine. And when he was drunk, he, you know, carelessly or otherwise, had himself uncovered in his tent. Now, to make the story very explicit, Ham, Canaan's ancestor, forefather, because we're going to give the genealogies again in a moment, saw that his father was naked and went out and told his two brothers, Shem and Japheth. In fact, the whole thing is probably based on this little poem that comes in line 26 and 27, but we'll get to that. Blessed be Yahweh, God of Shem, let Canaan be his slave. May God extend to Japheth the hospitality to live in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be his slave. That's what this is all about. Why they have a right to sing such a song. And it clearly is a song. That Canaan is a curse. Line 25, he shall be his brother's meanest slave. And the reason is, he must have done something. But seeing the story, we are looking at it in English, we don't understand what's been done. What's been done is very simple. Shem and Japheth took a cloak, putting it over their shoulders. If this is a good translation, you may have a different one, but let's follow this one. They walked backwards because they didn't want to be tempted by their dad's situation. And they chucked the coat over him like this, so they wouldn't uncover the nakedness of their father. Because the people who wrote these materials here from the Middle East clearly thought that even the sight of the sexual parts of a person would excite you to such an extent that you would not be able to restrain yourself from doing something. That I don't think they thought nudist colonies would work. And they don't think communal showers work. And they're feeling like Bedouins, I think, even today. That the mere sight of sexual parts, male or female, will cause sexual intercourse to take place of some kind. That's just for sure in their view. So the two older boys, they cover up their father's nakedness because they have respect for their father. Now the implication is that Canaan didn't just see his father's nakedness, or I don't know, what's your translation there for 22, line 22, a different one than I have? See his father's nakedness? See, the implication is they feel that it isn't just seeing his father, he must have done something too. And that he must have come out and told the others that there was something to be done there if he wanted to. And that a person in that situation can't resist sexual impulse. And but they did resist. They kept their faces turned away. When Noah woke from his drunken stupor, and that's the key passage, he learned what his youngest son had done to him. So you see, it isn't just looking at him. He did something to him. You got it? Anyone doesn't understand the story? That's the point. But it's nothing to do even with Ham, you see. Oh, you know, the reason the song is about who? Canaan. But the story is supposed to be about Ham. How did Canaan slip into this? Because they want Canaan to slip into it. Because for them, the Canaanites were all Sodomites. Okay? Anybody disapprove of mine, that don't like, can't palate, it is not palatable, what I've just told you? And by the way, do we really want to have children reading this book? Do you think they can really cope with this book? I don't. I personally don't think children should read this book. It's too high. It's too complex for them. And I mean, I'm not worried about the morals as such, but I don't think they can deal with this. They don't understand what they're reading. They have no clue what it's about. It's a very sophisticated book. And yet we always say, I read that when I was a kid. No. You read it when you were a kid, but you didn't read it. You just learned a few Bible stories. But you didn't read the book. In fact, that's why your ancestors used to read it when they were in their 40s and 50s, at the table and stuff, because it was for grown-ups to read. And I think people like Abraham Lincoln probably read books like this his whole life, because this is a big book. Anyway, who was I just hearing recently who was reciting the 23rd Psalm? I think it was in the National Cathedral for the service of the people down in New Orleans. You know, there are Psalms that people have never been read in their whole life in this book. When I was young, we used to have a prayer in the school. I mean, it wasn't a very deep prayer. But then one of the students had to pick out a psalm and read it in the class. Now, okay, that's been outlawed, but, you know, I'll tell you one thing. It made you respect the Psalms, and that you never forgot the Psalms, because someone was reading a psalm almost every single day. Usually they read the same psalm, the first psalm, the 23rd psalm, the 24th psalm. I can recite them all by heart just because of the classes we had. And I don't think that's bad. And you know, I don't care what religion you are. I think it used to be healthier, the situation. Now we have basically surrendered to Madonna and Britney Spears and gangster rap. That's okay. People can have those radios in their pockets and listen to that stuff, but nobody can say a song. I think that's really one of our big problems, frankly. The situation that has developed because of some of these over application of you know, some concepts that are not clearly understood. Those songs were really something very high in terms of literature, and they really helped people think about things, and they were high literature. I'd rather have them than gangster rap, honestly. So, okay, that's just a personal preference, I guess. Now, so he then said, after learning what his younger son had done to him, what we just said, "Cursed be Canaan, he shall be his brother's meanest slave. Blessed be Yahweh, God of Shem." Yahweh, you see, is Shem's God. Shem is the father of the Semites. That's where we get the term Semite from, the name of Shem. We're going to follow Shem's line. He will be the preferred line. But why does the God then say, "May God extend to Japhet, and may he live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave"? Notice God is used in the psalm, though I think this is a Yahweh story. By the way, we get back into the Elohist priestly, the very next line. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. See, we don't need this story. We could tack that next line, 28, 29, onto line 17. God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I will establish between myself and every living thing." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years, and all Noah's life lasted. You see, that's just back into the old thing. So we don't even. But he's had to put it in somewhere. The writer, the editor, has got this material on his table, so he splices it in here. I'm glad he did, because we wouldn't want to lose that bit of ancient information, however scurrilous it is. And he may live in the tents of Shem. Why do you think Japhet can live in the tents of Shem? What's behind that? That, I think, tells you something about when this was written. Why do you think that? Well, if you look at the genealogies, and we'll come to them, Japhet is basically what we would call the Indo-European peoples. That's why the linguists, German linguistic theorists of the 19th century divided things up into Semitic languages from Shem, and then Hamitic from Ham, African and other languages from Ham, and then Japhet, they didn't call it Japhet, they called that Indo-European. And three sort of language groups. So Japhet is really Europeans and others of that ilk all the way across the steppes of Central Asia. So back to the genealogy, line 10, chapter 10. Forget the little snippet there from the priestly material. I think we're back into a Yahweh's genealogy here. 10:1. Even though it looks like it could be otherwise. Anyway, it's a very messy genealogy, which is why I think it's probably Yahweh's. The Elohist genealogy, you'll see, comes in 11:10. You see 11:10? These are Shem's descendants. Now, we've heard that before. Such were the generations of heaven and earth when they were created. You know, these are Noah's descendants. These are Shem's. That gets back into the priestly line, 11:10. You see that? And then it just goes down in the same way, all the way down to Abraham.
I've heard the Canaanites. Are they considered Africans?
Well, let's go back to the genealogy,
No,
and
they're
then
not.
we'll see, because I'm going to
Okay.
go back now.
All right, just kind of curious.
Yeah, because
I
that's
just
in
kind of
this-
wonder what your take is on
Yeah,
that.
no, I'm not. I'm going to go back now. That's in the genealogies, and the oldest, as we know, is not very scientific, and he's confused. So the question will come up is, let's look where these people appear in these genealogies. Okay, look at chapter 10. I didn't answer my question about Japheth. The reason Japheth is getting special treatment, and the reason it shows you, and I said this is Yahweh's genealogy, the reason Japheth's getting special attention is because it's probably written in the period of David, this material, at least in the form we have it. Not maybe its final form, but that particular genealogy or material song. The reason is, if you look at David's champions, some of David's champions were non-Jews, were fighting with him. In particular, Uriah the Hittite, who he later has killed because he takes his wife from him. Now, Uriah the Hittite is definitely a people from the north. The Hittites have come south here in Syria and Transjordan, but they originally were up in Asia Minor, what we now call Turkey. And they were Indo-European peoples, probably next to Troy and those places, one of the neighboring peoples of the Trojans. They came from, they had a big empire in central Anatolia, Asia Minor. It was Greek in those days. And they came down into this area at some point, and then they lost their power to some extent, and some of their military groups, professional soldier class, entered the service of local kings like David. So you see, Shem extended hospitality to Japheth in his tents. Japheth had come down. Shem, David's ancestor, extended hospitality in his tents to Japheth. It probably relates to this period when the Hittites were close allies of the Hebrews. And that is the 10th century, not before. Because you can also say that the Philistines were a Greekish people. We know enough about the Philistines from archaeology that we know that they are a group of Mycenaeans from Mycenae in the Peloponnesus, the same people that fought the Trojan War. And their pottery, their implements, their chariots, everything are Mycenaean, we know from the archaeology. And they seem to be descendants of a people that attacked Egypt in around that 11th, 12th century BC period, who the Egyptians had trouble fighting off of. I don't know if I have a picture of them, but there are some pictures of them on some of the tombs. The Egyptians call them the sea peoples. Let's see if I can find them. I got them in the back here. So I won't be able to find this thing. I can never find anything. Well, anyway, that's the problem with these books. You can never find what you're looking for in any case. But let's see, maybe the book of Samuel. 155. Let's see, maybe this might give it to me.
Are you looking for the Hittite?
No, I'm looking for the sea peoples. I'm looking for the pictures of the sea peoples that come off of Egyptian tombs, and they have feathered headdresses, and they're fighting the Egyptians from their boats. In any case, I can't find it there, and that's the problem with books like that. You can never find what you're looking for until 10 months later. But the Philistines are probably also a similar people to the Hittites. And they invade the coast at this time, and they settle on the coast. The same way the Normans invaded the French coast and settled in Normandy. They were really Norsemen. The Philistines are really Greco-Asian Minor sea peoples. And probably they were all set in motion by the eruption of Thera, which was like the eruption of Krakatoa, and overwhelmed all these places in the Aegean Sea and set a lot of people in motion. But we have pictures of these people on the tombs in Egypt because the Egyptians fought them, and therefore they moved up the Palestine coast. I think it was Ramesses or one of those pharaohs fought them. And he brags about the fact that he was able to fight them off, but it's not clear that he was that successful. But they would be one of these Japhethite descendants too. So let's see them here. Japheth's son, Gomer. You could even say that's Germany right there, but I wouldn't want to. Magog, we know Gog and Magog from the people who believe in the apocalypse and so on. The Medes, the Persians. Javan. This is not scientific like the, or ceremonial like the priestly, so clearly it's a Yahwist genealogy. Javan, well, people don't realize, even in Daniel, Javan is Greece. And it's very simple, because J in English is Y in Hebrew. So Javan is Yavan. Y in Greek is I. V in Greek is O. N is Ion. Ionic civilization. The Ionic Sea and so on. And people don't realize that when Daniel, who a lot of people read, speak about Javan, he's really speaking about Alexander the Great. And people think that Javan is someplace out in Timbuktu or something. No, it's not. It's the Hebrew word for Greece. Javan to this day. In Arabic, Greece is Yunus, same thing. Let me finish what I'm saying. So, Javan are the Greeks, and there's another thing that is related to that. In Hebrew, the word for wine is yayin. And I think that also is a variation on the word Yavan, I and O, interchange in Hebrew, in the writing. And probably wine they saw as coming from Greece. And therefore they named it with the same letters as Greek. Yeah, what do you want to say?
It's odd though, but I just like hearing your perspective on things. Like for the Gog and Magog, is there any credence to that? That it's like, and I know with the
I think it's Central Asia.
Central Asia, so it's not. Is it considered Russia from?
Yeah, it's probably out there. I think it is. Yeah, I think you're right. Like Tubal, Meshech, all those places. Yeah, the steps of Russia.
So their interpretation is accurate on that.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay.
But whether it's the Russians to that.
Yeah.
Well, there is another one. There's a thing called Rus. At one point it says Rus, Meshech, and Tubal. I forget where it is. I think it's in Ezekiel. Yeah, it probably is the Russians. Probably is. For the Jews even today, Ashkenaz, Gomer is their name for German. Ashkenaz. And they even call Jews who speak German Ashkenazic Jews. And then all these Yavan son, Tarshish, that's Asia Minor. We even know that's where Paul comes from. The Kittim, certainly that's Crete. Kittim. The Danites, those are the Philistines. The Dananites are the Philistines. And that, you see, and from these came the dispersal of the islands of the people. So they know that these are island people. So not very scientific, but still it's informational and interesting, don't you think? Really interesting. So these are Japheth's sons, according to our language, tribes, and nations. Okay, so with that we can figure those out. But that's, hey, again, my friend here and others in the classroom, look, he's not really talking about Eskimos, Japan, Australia, Bushmen, Hindus, Indonesians, Polynesians, American Indians. They don't know that. That doesn't mean these people didn't exist. It's just their picture of the world from their corner of the world, what they knew, and therefore, again, to load this onto poor God, as every word has to be totally accurate, I think is unfair to the text. I mean, there are human intermediaries for this text. You can show it to your mom too if you want, and see what she thinks about that. She'll probably crucify me, but no. Ham's sons, and that's what you're talking about, Africa mainly, but also Egypt. Cush is Ethiopia. Mitzrayim is Egypt. Egypt of the two rivers. Ayam in Hebrew means two. It's a dual usage. We don't have it in English. Canaan, you see, is also there. Cush's sons, Sheba, well that we know is southern Arabia, moving over into the Ethiopian coastline. Havilah, that's Mesopotamia. And some other things. I don't notice Sheba they think is different from Seba, but I don't think it is. And then more Yahwist hocus pocus. Cush became the father of Nimrod, the first potentate on the earth. He was a mighty hunter in the eyes of Yahweh. See, it's Yahwist. And hence the saying, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter in the eyes of Yahweh. Okay, some imperfectly remembered old information. And he had a big empire, and they were included, and these are all Semites. See, this is Mesopotamia, Babel, which is Babylonian, Erech, Akkad, Akkadians, which is northern, sort of like northern Babylonia, Syria. And then Ashur, the Assyrians, who built Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrians, where we get those wonderful sculptures from. So they know these people are all Semites and related, you see. They understand that. Mitzrayim. But you see, the problem here is they're putting all those people as Hamites. I think they're putting all those people as Hamites. So here's where your confusions come in. This is the Yahwist. He's not very scientific. He sees it all as descendants of Cush, which is Ethiopia, even though all this is Mesopotamia and northern Syria. And we wouldn't have put it like that. And then Canaan. I can't do all this stuff, but does this interest you to figure out who these people are? Okay. 13, Mitzrayim is Egypt. Only Caphtor from where the Philistines came, you see? Again, they think the Philistines are Hamites when they're really Japhetites. But in any case, Caphtor is definitely Crete. So this is not really accurate, this genealogy. They're putting Africans, people from Crete, Mesopotamia, all in the same family. And Canaan became the father of Sidon, which is, of course, it's even there today. It's in Phoenicia, it's in Lebanon. And then all these local Canaanite tribes, Jebusites, Amorites, we're going to meet throughout the early chapters of the Old Testament, Hivites, all our local neighbors who we don't like, of course, we the writers. And later the Canaanite tribes got scattered. And they're, even as far as Gaza, look, Gaza, we know the Gaza even today. It's even mentioned then, the Gaza Strip. And we see all of the trouble there. The Hebrews would just have said at that time, yeah, I told you so. That's how they would have looked at it, the way we might see it today as well, full of difficulties. And then, of course, down to the Dead Sea area, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, so on. And we know we're going to meet Sodom and Gomorrah, so they're part of the Hamite, Canaanite genealogy. Those were Ham's sons. So far, Canaan is Ham's son. Shem was also the father of children. And he became the sons of all the ancestors of all the sons of Eber, which is obviously where we get Hebrew from. The elder brother of Japheth. Who's the elder brother of Japheth? Eber or Shem? Anyway, Shem was supposed to be. And here we are back again with the Assyrians. We just put them under Hamites, but now we see that they're Ashur, Aram, the Arameans, the Armenians. And Eber again. To Eber were born two sons. We're following, this is not a very scientific genealogy, this is yours. First, Peleg, because the earth was divided, and Peleg means division, I think. The second, Yoktan. He's a character known in Arabian folklore in the Arabian Peninsula to this day. And then all these other people. Havilah again. But I think we had Havilah under the previous one, if I'm not mistaken, under the Hamites. Let me go back, but I think yeah, there he is, line 6 under the Hamites. That's the problem again, that some of these people pop up under both genealogies, Hamites and Shemites, okay? That was what you were asking. That's the problem, that this is not a scientific genealogy.
I got you.
I don't see Canaan doing that, but Canaan is clearly not probably a Hamite, but I guess that's how they saw it. Yoktan again is that Arabian. Shem sends, so that's the end of that. These were the tribes of Noah's sons, according to all their descendants and their nations. And from these came the dispersed nations all over the flood, earth after the flood. Okay, that's one way of looking at it, and that'll do from a Middle Eastern perspective. Now we get another Yahweh story. All these are famous. They're just little short stories, but the Yahweh has just got one story after another. This is the Tower of Babel. Everyone loves the Tower of Babel. I mean, it's not the thing, but the story, they all know it. And we've already heard that Babel is one of the sons of Canaan or something, isn't he? I don't know where that was, but you can go back. Oh, there it is. Nimrod's sons. Babel, Erech. So Nimrod had big empires, and Babel, the Babylonian, where present-day Baghdad is, it was a big empire for a long time, and the Hebrews knew it. So, let's see. Where is the story again? Here it is. Throughout the earth, men spoke the same language with the same vocabulary. We're just continuing the always line here. The chapter division means nothing. And they found a plain, Shinar, to be settled. Come, let us make brick and fire. They built these big buildings. Let us build ourselves a town and a tower that reaches up to heaven. It's like, little country bumpkins, like the Hebrews going to the big city in Babylon and seeing the big buildings there. I don't know, there used to be a song from that musical Oklahoma. Everything's up to date in Kansas City. They're building it about as high as they can go, and there's skyscrapers or something. That's how the Hebrews would have seen Babylon. And so these big buildings they thought were frightening. So they built a town with these ziggurats, what we would call ziggurats. There's a big ziggurat down in Orange County. It used to be a federal center. I don't know what it is. They still call it the ziggurat. You know that building down there near that park, down somewhere down by Mission Viejo? Yeah. They still call it the ziggurat, don't they?
Yeah.
Because it looks like that.
Yeah, it's really weird looking.
Yeah, because it looks like a Babylonian sort of ziggurat. And that's what we're talking about, one thing stacked upon another. These folks obviously haven't been down that way like you and I have. Okay, I'm going to try to get to the end of this story before we take a break. So, according to this story, the sons of men had built this big tower, and Yahweh didn't like what he saw. Look, these are a single people with a single language. And, they can get anything done if they keep on like this. Nothing will be too hard for them. Come, let us. That's really weird. He's using the royal we, like it's the host of heaven, or the angels, or the demigods, or whatever else is going on up there, as the Elohim normally does. But this is the plural, the singular Yahweh now doing this. Come, let us go down and confuse their languages, so that they should not be understand each other. And therefore they'll have to go around the whole earth, and they won't be able to talk very well, and therefore they won't be able to build these big buildings so easily. And therefore the place was called Babel, because it was there Yahweh confused the languages of the whole earth, because of the tower they had built. Well, in Hebrew, the word for confuse is, I don't want to bore you with this Hebrew, le-vavel, le-bavel, le-babel. We get our English word Babel from that. It's a Hebrew word meaning to confuse things, Babel, to le-vavel. I mean, I don't know if I can write for you in Hebrew, but anyway, in English transliteration, and this is pronounced as a V, le-bavel, Babel. So once again, they're doing their play on language. Because Babylon sounds to them like the Hebrew word Babel. You follow me? But it's not. Babylon actually comes from the word Bab-El. And in Semitic languages, Bab is gate. El is God, gate of God. It isn't the derivation they're giving here. But this is their folksy, friendly, Yahwist, folkloric derivation of what Babel means. There God mixed up the language. So the Yahwist always wants to tell stories of people's names and how they got their names, and he likes to play off the names. Yitzhak, Isaac. Why is Yitzhak called Isaac? Because the angel comes to Sarah, and she's 90 years old or something, and he announces that she's going to have a son after all this time. And Sarah laughs because she says, this is ridiculous. Am I, after 90 years old, going to have my womb open? Then the angel gets angry and says, you shouldn't laugh. This is not a joke. Therefore, his name is Yitzhak, laugh. And he likes stories like that. He makes stories up on the basis of names. Now, are they true stories? I personally don't think they are, but they're fun. They're, you know, what do we know? Look at least they try to know something about their ancestors. I challenge most of you in this class, tell me a story about your great-great-great-grandfather. What? I bet most of you don't even know his name. So, I mean, you know, we're much further behind the eight ball than they were. They at least have some memories that the poets have given them. We don't have any. Most of you, and me too, you're not the only one. I have no idea. I don't know. 3 generations back, 4? After that, it's anything could be. So we can laugh at these people until we look at ourselves. And then we realize how ignorant we are. So one shouldn't be considering these people certainly are no more ignorant than us. In fact, they are less so. They have a few more stories. I don't know how accurate they are, but they're good stories and they're attractive. Okay, so it's based on the Hebrew word. There's another story, for instance. You know the story about Moses? In Exodus, Moses gets a name because the Egyptian lady who had adopted him said, I'm calling him Moses because I pulled him out of the water. Because of his being in a basket in the water, right? You all know that story. Well, that's because in Hebrew, to pull out is Moshe. I pull him out. But the fact of the matter is that, first of all, the Egyptian lady probably didn't know Hebrew. So she wouldn't have given him a Hebrew name in the first place. And so that's, again, the Hebrew storyteller trying to figure out why Moses' name is Moses on the basis of a Hebrew usage. But in fact, Moses, in English and in Greek and other languages, is a very good Egyptian name. A lot of the, I forget how you, I don't remember how you spell it, but anyway. Like that. Most of the Egyptian pharaohs from this period, I'm not sure if I remember correctly, had Mos in their name because it meant an Egyptian son of. So Moses actually is a very good Egyptian name in and of itself. It doesn't need a Hebraicization. But the writer feels it wants to Hebraicize everything and tell a good story about it, and so he does. Do we think these stories are true? You can. I'm not sure if they are accurate, but they certainly are colorful and a lot of fun. All right, we'll stop there and we'll get to the Edwards genealogy. We'll be able to go faster now. We're getting to the stories of Abraham now, and we'll speed up. Maybe I'm going too fast anyway, but in any case, we'll be able to go faster. You had a good question there. Thanks a lot about that stuff about Paul.